WTBQ.
Good afternoon, Tony Abbatine, live for Game On. It's been a few weeks since we've been live in studio. We apologize for that. The road show has been around the country. We've been very busy at Frozen Ropes and the Rock Sports Park, but we're happy to be back today. This is certainly the time of the year in which slumps, who's struggling with their batting average, who's struggling with their earn run average. We're back talking really mental skills training again. And interesting, last week, I think it was last Friday, we had a brain day workshop at Frozen Ropes in Chester, New York. And for those of you who have not been to one of our brain day workshops, it's a pretty cool thing. You bring in 9 to 17-year-olds, baseball, softball, soccer players. We meet 2 or 3 hours together, and we discuss some really cool things having nothing to do with the mechanics of the swing or throwing or things like that. We talk about competitive anxiety and goal setting and affirmations and parental pressure and all the things that at the end of the day, the better athletes and the better coaches are realizing are the big differences in performance. And what was interesting last week, all of the players that were there had their journals, had their playbooks, and we went over a lot of different things, but the one thing in particular, and we're seeing this over and over again, is the need for a routine. And I think so many athletes that are looking for, I call it the lifesaver, that are looking for some stability, that just can't really understand why their batting practice swing is different from their game swing, while they're throwing in the bullpen is lights out and they're hitting corners and are, have unbelievable control. The game starts and all of a sudden their delivery breaks down and they've got control problems. So the need for a routine, and I know last time when Alan Jaeger, who should be joining us sometime this hour, he was with us a few weeks ago. I think sometimes even at the Little League level, well, this stuff is really not for the 9, 10, 11, or 12-year-old. I hear that all the time, that the whole sports psychology, mental skills training, it's for the whacked out people. It's for the older players that really are looking for the icing on the cake. And that could not be further from the truth. And in doing this for almost 25 years now in the way of player development, I'm convinced that the sooner and earlier that you can get the importance of mental skills training and provide some substance and some roadblocks, if you will, to the younger players, the better their performance will be and the more they'll enjoy the sport as they get older. Like anything else, the longer you wait to change old habits, many times it becomes a bigger issue. So the topics that we've talked about in the past, and certainly what we'll be talking about today, is not about high school, not about colleges, and certainly not at the professional level. If you look at professional athletes, they were either lucky enough or they had the right support staff when they were younger to get this information. So as a good coach, as a good parent, understanding what these topics are about is everything. And getting back to the whole routine, the building of a routine is something that really starts with a desire from a player themselves. And a routine it's a habit. It's something that you do over and over again in practice, in a scrimmage, in a regular season game, in a postseason game, in the championship game. So it puts the mind and the body, if you will, in a very stable and familiar environment. And that's really what good athletes do, that their brain and their whole focus level doesn't change from practice to the championship game. And the commonality of that really is the building of a routine. And we'll use softball or baseball as an example, but we can certainly, in working with soccer players now and lacrosse players, football players, the need for that routine really is the starting point to a consistent level of play. And that's really what we're looking for with the youngsters. Can they at least be consistent? And one of the things that's interesting at all the coaching clinics that we've done this year in Orange County, in New York, and around the country, this whole thing about, well, how do you get kids to have fun and enjoy themselves? Well, kids and children and athletes enjoy themselves when they're having a level of success. And yes, sportsmanship is important, and tone of voice and the timing in which you're going to reprimand and the need to be positive are important. But at the end of the day, particularly with baseball and softball, that is such a game of statistical failure. getting them to be better is certainly one of the best ways for them to enjoy the sport. And that goes, excuse me, for all the sports involved. So let's take, for example, the routine or the beginning of a routine for a 10-year-old. And that building of the routine for the 10-year-old is no different than what some of you watch Derek Jeter or Alex Rodriguez or David Wright watching them on TV. It really starts with their on-deck preparation. What exactly are they doing in the on-deck circle, or in Little League, it's really in the dugout? How are they getting ready? Are they watching the pitcher? Are they seeing the pitcher's tendencies? Are they practicing the timing of their swing? And certainly, when hitting is involved, are they going through what we call their mech check, their mechanical checklist? At the younger level, they still don't really have a good understanding and aren't very consistent with their swing. So are they going over their K to Ks? Are they practicing their back stretch? Do they have the beginning of what we call a bit of a dance in the stance? Are they practicing the hot knife approach to the ball? That's really the beginning of them getting ready to hit, and way before they even come out into the batter's box. And with that, and it's taken me a few years to come up with one model, if you will, which particularly for hitters, I think works. And since Frozen Ropes is all about acronyms and making it easy to understand both for the athletes and the coaches, we've created this READY hitting system. READY standing for review, enter, affirmation, dance, and the word you. And I'd like to kind of break down what that means. And for so many of our younger players and the coaches, this has really become a great starting point when you're trying to help the little ones. And I say the little ones, we define little as under 30. This isn't for just simply the T-ball or the Little League level. This READY hitting system that we've really integrated the mechanical, the visual, and the physical components of the swing really can be used for every age group. The R in READY, let's start at the beginning, review the situation. And this gets back to making sure that hitter understands what his role might be once he's in the batter's box. Is it second and third with no outs when you're coming up, right? That's certainly going to change your mindset and what you need to do as compared to your team's down 5 runs and you're just looking to get on base. Where second and third, certainly you need to put a ball in play, get a ball into the outfield for a sacrifice fly. So reviewing the situation really is the first component of the letter R. Review the setup. And again, look no further than Citi Field and in Yankee Stadium. You'll watch people that do this for a living. You'll watch the college softball games on ESPNU, and you'll really see the on-deck batters breaking down and for the last time feeling and understanding and looking at what their swing should be looking like, whether it's in slow motion, whether it's half speed or full speed. It really doesn't matter. They're actually getting ready. That's reviewing the setup, because we know as a good hitter, you're thinking about your swing, thinking about the elbow, the hands, the feet, the hand path certainly cannot be the prevailing thought when you're getting ready to hit itself. The last part of the R is relive greatness, and this becomes extremely powerful. Last time Alan and I were on, we talked about visualization, we talked about imagery components and whatnot, but the R in READY, relive greatness. Let your mind's eye, let your whole system relive and be saturated with images of great performances from either the at-bat before. You're coming up for your second at-bat, and the first time you came up, everything was in sync. Pitch selection was outstanding, right? You were able to be dancing and have great timing with the pitcher. You had a line drive, or in most parts of the country, we call it a frozen rope. Let yourself experience and relive that greatness. So we're going to go back and forth with the READY system of hitting. And for those of you that teach hitting, be prepared for some discussions on the mechanics of the swing, but understand that when you're going to really understand and teach hitting, rhythm and timing and pitch recognition really are the most important components of the swing once the game starts. I believe we are now being joined by Alan Jaeger. Alan, Tony Abbatine from Game On. We're on the right side of the coast, and I'm assuming you're out on the left side right now.
The right side. I'll just take that as meaning right of left.
Well, it's great to hear your voice again, and I know I was looking forward to the show today. We had such a great feedback last time that you were on. We ran out of time, but when you get two people like me and you that are just, I think, so passionate and are learners and listeners and really care about what we're doing, it was a great show. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the ancillary stuff. I know you and I had talked about last time the process and strategy and getting back into the technique component. I'm going to let you run, and like last time, I'm going to let you come up for breath every once in a while, Alan, because breathing is important. All right. But for those of you that have never heard or have never met Alan before, Alan Jaeger from the Jaeger Sports Academy, it's kind of hard to explain your whole gig, Alan. I mean, you're the throwing skill guru, you're the mental skills guru. You do it all. And Alan, in his book that I know sits way up in the libraries at a lot of our training centers now, Getting Focused and Staying Focused, the Far East Approach to Sports and Life. If you haven't read it, and if you care about your children or yourself, you need to pick it up. This isn't about baseball or softball. This is really just understanding and putting some substance behind some big words like focus and concentration and discipline and visualization and all the stuff that's out there that we need to do a better job as parents and coaches to make it part of what young athletes are training. Alan, let's go.
Well, how should we start? Well, I mean, as you mentioned, we both have this incredible passion for the mental game, and it's funny because I've done so much work the last 10 years in long toss and throwing field, but, as I was talking to somebody yesterday about this, I really first started in this game in the mental side, and it was my initial start because I felt like it was by far the most neglected part of the game and by far the most maybe misunderstood, and so fortunately, having some players early on in my career really take to this and just have incredible results was inspiring. And so to this day now, I just feel like things haven't changed from the point of view that it's probably still the most neglected part of the game. And I just think if people are real serious about their careers, and as you said, it eventually just is all about life, they have to delve into this. And I mean, this is just reality. If you want to be a better, we probably talked about this last time. I went to a high school where I had to learn to push and drag and suicide and fake suicide and slash and fake slash. I mean, that was a critical part of our training as position players, and so I had to really get pretty good at those skills. And I try to keep this simple with athletes and say, look, it's not about a real complicated thing. This is about taking some simple principles and really understanding them and really applying to them, and maybe most of all, understanding that there's something you can do every day, which we call a practice, like any other practice, where you can start implementing some new skills into your life. You can start integrating a state of mind that's more consistent with where you want to be, as opposed to a state of mind that you may not realize is a detriment and is totally preventing you from being freed up in the game and being freed up to allow your talents to come out, so to speak.
Alan, how do you, and I know we touched upon this last time, how does a student athlete or the coach himself go from theory to application? And I'm sure you've seen this over the years. People want to get involved. Athletes, I need that. I know I was mentioning before you came on the air, we had our monthly Brain Day workshop last Friday, and it's the standard. So how much of the game is mental? And all the kids say it's 80, 90%. Great. So how much time are you spending on the mental part of the game? 0, 5, 2, I don't know how. I think that's probably the biggest barrier. How does again, the younger ones I think need to be spoon-fed, but you're in high school now and you've got a coach, high school coach or a travel coach, they're just not buying into it. I mean, they still think that, it's all about running you into the ground and swing harder and relax by teaching you how to yell harder and whatnot. How do you get those high school and even college players to break the barrier and start realizing that this is something that I can do? I can be the master of the universe and start this thing. I think the biggest challenge that we have is get to first base.
Well, you're right. I mean, it's a process, and I think the more, luckily every year, like the ABCA show, for instance, and the Mohegan, two of the biggest shows in the country, they always have at least one or two quote-unquote mental training guys or sports psychologists. So I feel like the message is being hit every year. But, like you said, you have to get to the Chiefs, really, and you have to really get them to start understanding that this is part of their practice. I wrote an article, ironically, for this exact reason in collegiate baseball. The last article I wrote maybe came out 3 months ago, and the title of the article, I believe, was called Mental Practice Plans, and the play on words is that, when you have, all coaches have these practice plans that are 2, 3, 4 hours a day, and my point in the article was that how can you not have something in your practice plan every day that addresses the mental game? I mean, even if it's 15 minutes of just laying down and doing some breathing and some relaxation, or talking about visualization, or just talking about the mental game, how can it not be a part of your, a staple in your practice plan, not twice a week and 3 times a month, every single day? And I don't care if it's 10 minutes. Hopefully it's more like 15 or 20. And I think we may have talked about this last time, but one of the best things that I think I ever saw in action is that Rich Hill at the University of San Diego, who I go back to 1992 with, working with he and his program, he's always been a huge mental game guy. He's always been very proactive. But about 4 or 5 years ago, we actually had that talk about where they do something every day for the most part, but I really wanted him to have teeth in it by having the kids lay down and actually do some breathing and some relaxation and some clearing of their mind and getting present and getting quiet and all these good mental skill practice you can do, just prior to actually going out and doing things physically. And that was the first year that team had ever entered the top 10 in Division I baseball in the rankings. It was the first year that they hosted a regional. I think at some point they got down as low as 5 or 6 in the country. And look, they have a talented team. He's a great coach. I'm not trying to place us all on the mental game stuff, but it was just kind of coincidental that all these great things started happening to the program above and beyond the normal greatness that they already were. And I guess the bottom line is this: if the coaches at some level aren't making it part of their practice plan, they're just depriving their kids of their potential greatest upside, and that's sad. But you got to remember this: you can't blame the coaches on a certain level either, because a lot of this is just A, misinformation, or B, just a pure lack of awareness. It's they didn't grow up with it. It's tricky on some level for them maybe to get it to that degree, but hopefully people like us that keep pounding this message, and it is getting out there, and hopefully at some point, if it's not the coaches, look, the last thing I'll say, and then I'll throw it back to you, is this: the internet is very powerful, as you know, and if you're a 16-year-old kid in high school, which nowadays is like a 20-year-old kid when we were growing up, they know to go to the internet, they know to access YouTube videos, they know to Google the word relaxation or mental training. Fortunately, they're finding ways to reach out to people like us, and so there are other ways besides just what the coach is doing or not doing at practice.
Well, what's interesting, Alan, you're right, and we kiddingly say in the frozen ropes private sector world, thank goodness that some of the coaches out there are such bozos. Thank goodness that there's so much misinformation out there, because I wouldn't have a job. And it's kind of sad, but if the travel coaches and all of the high school coaches and all of the college coaches really understood and were well read and didn't just simply teach what they did, but taught what they could learn, it would be a different environment out there. And quite frankly, in the private sector, we're very fortunate, and I'm sure you are too. We get the more self-motivated. We get the kids, the families that are searching for what I call the missing piece, the next level component of athleticism. So, You're right. It's going to be, in my opinion, it's not going to happen at the high school level. Certainly in the East, and I'm talking to Jessica Mendoza a few months ago, and she's actually going to be our guest next Friday. No one's even playing high school softball anymore. Travel ball has become the vehicle in which the better players with the better information are getting an opportunity to be around better players, better competition, in a way to get ready for either the Major League Baseball draft or college. I mean, so you're saying it's getting better. I'm saying it's getting better, but it's not going to get much better in the next 10 years for a lot of different reasons. You've got more crazy things going on in the world. You talk about competitive anxiety and fear and self-esteem issues and the over-medication of children and whatnot, how 10, 11-year-olds are losing their visualization and imagery skills at such an earlier age than it was 20, 30 years ago, because there's no downtime, there's no quiet time because of the internet and TV and things like that. I don't want to be gloom doom, but the next generation are going to need the Alan Jagers and the Frozen Ropes more, I think, than ever before.
Well, you know what? It's an interesting point, and I would lean toward this way. It's going to become a necessity. It may take, as you said, 10 years, but I think what's happening is that this generation is creating a desperate need for more mental practice. I think it's going to become something that's, look, we probably talked about this last time. 20 years ago, there was 3 yoga studios here in Santa Monica. Now there's maybe 60 in a square 2 miles or something. Maybe 60 is probably lowballing it. There might be 160. So I think that similarly, like you said, with this generation, with all the gadgets and toys and technical stuff, I do feel like people are going to have to start searching deeper for answers. There's going to have to be a counter adjustment, and I just feel like this is going to become more and more part of the culture. Yep. I have noticed this when I first started, which was in the early '90s compared to now. The receptivity level is off the charts compared to when I started, and I feel like it is getting better, and I feel like exponentially it's going to grow, and I could be over-optimistic, but I feel like it kind of has to at this point.
Alan, let's go. We have I know we mentioned it before, the so-called enemy list, and I'd like to get your feedback and some substance on. You hear this all the time, and I know in some of the workshops, I was out in Omaha, Nebraska a few weeks ago at one of our new locations, and we asked the young players to kind of raise their hand if the phrase or description in the PowerPoint presentation hits home to them, and over again, the one that I think gets the most response and the most hands up, I'm my own worst enemy. Share some insight, if you can, on what that is in your opinion, and some general advice that we could provide the coaches and indirectly some of the players with this phenomenon that really cripples performance at times.
Well, number one, I would say it's just a byproduct of a perfectionist and to a degree over-perfectionism. I think when you're your worst enemy, your expectations are critically high, and I think it just sets you up for failure because, as you know, you could hit the ball on the screws 4 straight times and line out. Someone with a good mental game is going to take that as a positive. Someone with not a good mental game is going to take that as failure. And so I think that's probably the first thing that jumps out at me. It's perfectionism to a fault. And then secondly, I just think it also comes down to just perspective. I mean, if someone is their own worst enemy, then they don't have insight into the key to them performing well, which is to have a supportive state of mind, if you will, a supportive feeling within themselves that they're doing their best, and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, that to me is a very healthy attitude. Do your best. There's a great saying in the Tao Te Ching, which is do your work and then step back. More or less everything will fall into place. And so I guess I would just say, number one, it's about being probably trying to be too perfect, and two, it's just about a lack of perspective. When you can teach kids the perspective of really rewarding yourself by doing your best, that's a real positive way of nurturing someone and really nurturing themselves. And it's hard to go wrong. It's hard to go wrong when you just say, look, I know I've worked hard, I've done my work, I'm doing my best. Will I go 4 for 4, 0 for 4 today? As long as I know I've done we call it a process. What we do is we teach our players there is a process. Everybody has their own process, but almost every pitcher I've ever met, it's more or less about having a focal point, having some form of a balance point, and having some form of an aggressiveness or an attack to the focal point. Hitters, it's almost always about some form of relaxation in the box, seeing the ball well, which is, to me, still the single most important thing you have to do as a hitter. You have to see the ball well and maybe, attack the inside part of the ball or hit it hard somewhere. So almost all hitters and pitchers I've worked with have a process that's very similar. And my goal with each player is really simple. Master your process. I didn't say go 4 for 4. I didn't say hit 450. I said master your process. Be great at your process. And if you do your process well and at the end of the day you stuck to it, then you have to know how to be totally cool with whatever the results were that day. That's a healthy way of looking at it. If when you say, you're your own worst enemy, well, what you're basically saying is that someone has no clue what their process is. They have no clue the perspective of whether they follow their process or not, and that's where the over-perfectionism can always, of course, kick in as well. So the process, to me, is probably the easiest way to address being your own enemy, because once you understand your process, you can't be an enemy to yourself if you're in your process.
We're talking with mental skills guru Alan Jaeger. We're going to come back and continue to understand and start defining the process and how the building and having one is really the lifeblood of performance. This is Tony Abbatine on Game On. We're joined this week with Alan Jaeger. We were blessed with some Santa Monica weather early in April, 70s, 80s. We had the bathing suits out, the suntan lotion, the pina coladas, and now we're back to 45 with a wind chill factor. They're actually predicting some snow. We're in the Hudson Valley part of New York, and there's a pretty good chance we're going to see some snow maybe on Saturday night. But thank goodness we have our turf fields over at the Rock, and business will be booming this weekend with tournaments and some games going on, and just getting ready for some great summer weather hopefully coming up soon. Before the break, we were Alan was starting to get into the process and mastering the process and really understanding what that's all about. Alan, if I can, and maybe you can use it to segue into the overall content that we wanted to talk about. We had the own worst enemy, the second most popular characterization, fear of failure. Something that, our coaches all the time are coming back and, man, this is a player that just doesn't want to be out there, that doesn't want to be the hero, doesn't want to be there when the game is on the line, is so afraid to play big. How can we help or start understanding what fear of failure is about, in your opinion?
Well, it's going to be a broken record, but I'm going to keep coming back to the process. When you're consumed by your process, in other words, see the ball well, hit it hard, be in tune with your breathing, things like that. If a thought comes into your mind that's going to create the fear, like I better get a hit or, the coach is going to pull me, that's a simple example of someone's going to start fearing failure, right? The idea is this: if the mind is trained to go into that mode, it's tough to fix on the fly. It's tough to tell someone not to fear that or not to have those kinds of thoughts. So I think a good segue, maybe after we address this, would be, well, what do you do to start preventing those kind of thoughts or dealing with those kind of thoughts, which to me is going to be having a mental practice every day to start understanding where thoughts that not just aren't about the fear of failure, but they could be about any kind of distraction. Who's in the stands? How many scouts are there today? Are there scouts today? So I think ultimately you're going to have to go back to the core, which is dealing with why the thought's going to begin with. But just to answer the question specifically about fear of failure is that Again, it's a lack of perspective. It's a lack of insight into an athlete. It's very normal, as you know. But at the end of the day, if a player doesn't understand and identify what makes him tick, what is his process, and be great at that, and he's vulnerable, which is part of being a human being, he's vulnerable to pressures, and he's vulnerable to succeeding or failing, then he's in a position where his mind is going to start to create potentially all sorts of thoughts that could be about a number of things, and as you know, a common one is the fear of failure. So I guess until you really address the why of the situation, why does a player fear failure, and for them to understand that state of mind, it's going to be hard to really address it. So I'd say the first thing you have to do is you have to address it. I mean, we can sit here all day, and I can give you 20 good ways to deal with someone who's got fear of failure issues. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a short-term fix.
Right.
Until the player understands why does he have those thoughts, because the thoughts are what creates the feelings and the emotions, and that's when you start getting in your own way. So I'm trying to think if I could summarize if someone had fear of failure. You know, I guess a quick fix would be to just get them to really buy into what is their approach about, what are they trying to accomplish, what is their process. If they're in tune with that, again, everything takes care of itself. And until you address why the thoughts are coming into the person's head, I just feel like a lot of the stuff is going to be short-term fixing.
And again, if you look at it from a hitting standpoint, Alan, a lot of it becomes, what is the end game? If the fear of not getting a hit, or if you're basing your performance on the uncontrollable, you're going to be constantly facing that fear of failure. And it really is, it almost sounds like a broken record. If you have a good understanding of a process, and you stick with it, you believe in it, at times even modify it, and start judging and evaluating your performance more from the inside as compared to the outside, as we say, fear of failure becomes less of an issue.
Yeah, and also, if you study peak performance, which really, in a way, is your process. When you're locked into your process, you can argue that you're in a peak state of mind. And by definition, there's several definitions to peak performance, but one of the main ones is the absence of consequences, the absence of results. Well, guess what fear of failure is? It's an awareness of results. It's an awareness of consequences. And you might say you can argue it's the awareness that I don't want to have a negative consequence, which is, you can argue, is fear of failure. So again, this keeps coming back to the process. As long as the player does not know what his process is or her process is, fear of failure can creep in simply because fear of failure represents that there are consequences, right, and that there are results.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to eliminate the consequences and the results in order. It's funny, I had a saying, I'm glad we're talking right now. I was playing tennis the other day, and I forget what the point was, but I remember saying to myself, maybe as a title for a new book, and nobody out there can steal it, but my thought came, eliminate the end point. That was something that just flashed in front. Eliminate the end point, which is another way of saying, there are no consequences, there are no results. I don't want to know, when I work with players, I tell them, I don't want you to ever look at stat sheets. I don't want you to know your batting average. I don't want you to know your ERA. I don't want you to know how many scouts are in the stands. I want you to know what your breath is. I want you to know where your focal point is as a pitcher. I want you to be able to attack your focal point, and that's it. Now, you be great at that. Now, if you want to get into anything else, then you might start dealing with fear of failure. Then you might start dealing with a lack of confidence. Then you might start dealing with tension, pressure, anxiety, stress, nervousness. Do you want me to go? I tell the player, do you want me to go on? So you can either have one thing, which is your process that you've already told me is what makes you feel like you're in a peak state of mind or you're locked in. So we've agreed we've identified it. You agree that that's who you are when you're at your best. And they're like, yeah, I agree with that. Well, then if you go anywhere else, now you're bringing consequences, results. Now you're bringing in the potential of fear of failure, right, stress, tension, and so on. So again, that's why this keeps coming back to your process and being great at it.
And again, we keep using the P word, and it was interesting. And this was a high school student, at one of our workshops where the P word is said over and over again. And she raised her hand and said, Coach, with no disrespect, but I'm so tired of hearing this process versus results. And every time that I ask my coach or I read things on the internet, I still don't really have a good understanding of what the P word is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly before, and this really gets back to self-help because, I'm convinced that the better players are either going to initiate their own self-help or they're going to find competent people who care, who sometimes, and I see this a lot, Alan, in our profession, I understand what process is. I can teach and explain the process to a 9-year-old or to a 27-year-old. But quite frankly, there's people out there in the mental skills training that use this word as the fix-all holy grail. And at the end of the day, some of the players aren't really getting it.
Mm-hmm. Well, there has to be. Look, I heard this from a friend of mine, Nate Trosky, out here on the West Coast. He changed the way I looked at teaching in one line about 3 years ago. He said, if the players don't understand the why of something, they're not going to get it. They're not going to understand it, and of course, it's going to be tough to apply. And so, even though that's maybe teaching 101, it's a very powerful reminder that these kids have to know what the process is, and they have to understand the why of it. It's nice to throw out the word process or be locked in or take a deep breath. Those are all important things, but if they don't understand the why behind it, it's going to be tricky for them. And that's, by the way, that's why the mental practice, which is something I want to make sure we get to too, is so important. Because look, you could have someone even explaining to you what the process is, and you may know the why of it, but if your mind has been conditioned the last 10 years to worry about who's in the stands or to always think about your batting average, no matter how many times I say be process-oriented, well, it may help, but I don't think it's going to have the end-all effect that it can have on you when you have someone who starts to have a practice every day so that they spend 20 minutes a day clearing their mind and being relaxed and being in the present moment, and all these buzzwords that are also akin to being, quote-unquote, in a process. I mean, the sheer act of sitting down, spending 20 minutes, and trying to lock into your breathing or stay present or however you want to phrase it is an act of being process-oriented. So you're actually building skills of being process-oriented through a mental training practice. You're obviously getting other benefits. But so I think if the listeners out there and people that are interested in the mental field, this is probably, to me, the single most important point to get today, which is if you do not have a practice every day where you are letting go of old programming that is causing the fear of failure, is causing the focus on the consequences and the results and who's in the stands, and putting the focus onto your breath and being present and relaxing and clearing your mind and getting out of your head and getting away from your thoughts and being in the moment. If you don't start changing those behaviors, it's very hard to assume that someone's going to be good at sticking to their process when the bases are loaded and it's a 3-2 count and they're down a run in the ninth inning or the seventh inning. So I guess my biggest point today is that you have to have a practice. Our book has 8 chapters. 2 of the chapters, one of them is on meditation and one is on the entire mental training practice, which includes visualization and imagery and other stuff. So it's obviously important, and I think that is where there's a little disconnect or a big disconnect with baseball and training and life and training. So have a practice every day where you can start letting go of result-oriented thoughts, which probably is more what our society is about than process-oriented thoughts, and where you can start to almost, you might say, replace that kind of a mentality with a new mentality that's based on being process-oriented and being in tune with your breathing and being in tune with the present moment and all these good buzzwords that sound good, but if you're actually living it every day for at least 20 minutes, and then, by the way, if you do a 20-minute mental practice session and you are feeling relaxed and clear-minded and feeling peaceful and focused and happy and confident, well, guess what? When you walk into your day, you're going to start exuding more of that feeling and that state of mind, even if it's a little bit, but 2 days later, a week later, a month later, 3 months later of doing this every day, it's ideally it's going to become part of who you are, and you're going to become that process-oriented person as a default, as opposed to probably a result-oriented or consequence-oriented person as a default.
And if they're not getting this in the team setting, Alan, and certainly your book, it's written in a way in which, whether you're a college graduate or someone who's got a law degree or just a high school graduate, there's so much substance in this. And again, I'm concerned about the high school and college players that are not around the coaches that are going to put as part of their practice plan some mental skills training. And unfortunately, that's the majority of the programs that are out there. Is that a knock on high school coaches and college coaches? No, it's the reality. So this gets back to what can that overachieving, self-motivated player who really wants to be all that she could be without sounding so corny. This is about her or him getting this information and doing a lot of this on their own.
It is, because look, at the end of the day, you know, when I start out with my lectures, I often start with one line, which is, how good do you want to be? And granted, it'd be a lot easier if your coach was laying you down for 10 or 15 minutes before practice every day. But at the end of the day, you know, if you really want to be good, you'll get up 20 minutes before school, and you'll do some breathing exercises. You'll get to practice before everybody else and sit in the locker room and put some headphones on and listen to some quiet music and do some breathing exercises. You'll do something before you go to bed at night. There are ways. If you're a professional player, you have no excuse, because you have 8 hours in the morning before you go to the field and early in the afternoon. So, to me, yes, it'd be better if the information was available for players, just like hitting lessons and pitching lessons are available. But I think it's out there enough to where people are aware of the mental game. Kids are aware of the importance of looking into this field, and I think that I hate to put it all on them, but you got to put something on them, that if they really are interested in finding out how good they can be, they need to delve into the mental game. And the only problem is, of course, is that there's a lot of kids in this country and in the world that don't even really know that the mental game exists, or there's a path to work at it.
Well, that gets back to what can we do, and certainly at the frozen rope locations, what was 3 years ago, hey, let's every once in a while put some mental skills training on, let's talk about this. Particularly in New York, it's become, I don't want to call it a cult following, but now it's, hey, there's a brain day workshop, we got to get in because you're not cool if you don't show up for 2 hours. And did you see last time Tony had them up on this ledge watching the sunset, and we were staring into the sun because he's telling us that's actually good for their eyes. And then we did this meditation thing, and we took our shoes off, and then we walked on rocks, and it felt really good. And then we did some role playing. It's becoming easier because we believe in it, and we're starting to let the younger players understand that you're going to go take practice. You mentioned before about the visual part of hitting, and that's where this ready process of hitting that I just unveiled a few weeks ago, it's so right on. I mean, it's 5 components of hitting, and there's not really one mechanical reminder that when that hitter is getting ready, the E standing for enter with elegance, the whole body language and what exactly goes on as you enter the batter's box. The A standing for affirmation. Do you have a pre-pitch phrase, a pre-hit phrase? Do you have a backup one, and is it genuine? The D standing for dancing with the pitcher, knowing that when that pitcher moves, there's a counter move that all great hitters have. And the Y becomes the ultimate. You be the ball. Manny Ramirez's most famous line from 7 years ago. Tony, if you really want to teach hitting or get other people to understand hitting, right, they need to understand what be the ball is all about, which segues into our visual mechanics, that this soft focus, fine focus nonsense isn't what the good hitters do, that you can control by controlling your breathing, you can control the size of a baseball. And so it's interesting, we're talking about the process. This ready system is really the first time in which we've said, take out the rotation, the linear, the hand path, the inside the ball, all the things that you hear over and over again that the good ones do, that's not really what they're doing. They're on autopilot by then. And what the good hitters are doing is they've taken the time to build what we're calling this ready system, this ready process, and they stick to it. And what's been exciting, to get a 10-year-old to start understanding, okay, I kind of understand what Relive Greatness is, and we'll kind of go through that. And we practice entering with elegance, okay? What exactly does that mean? Taking stock of the batter's box. Self-talk, we mentioned that last time, the importance of it being genuine, being non-judgmental. This is at least our attempt, Alan, in getting the process training, if you will, to mainstream America.
I think it's great. I think the fact that someone can go somewhere and get insight into the mental game and do some meditation and do some things that are going to get them not just baseball training, but get them to be more in tune with just how their mind works. I mean, to me, at the end of the day, that's what is most needed. It's most neglected, and I think that's where this thing starts. I mean, I've been very proactive with players saying, look, if you're not doing your practice every day, there's not going to be a lot for us to talk about because I'm going to be dealing with someone who's caught up in a web of other stuff. You have to do the practice, right. Ideally, to get to where you become like, you know what, it's like you said with Be the Ball. Be the breath. Be right. The quietness. Be the presence. Be the presence. Be the relaxation. Be the instinctive part of who you are when you're not in your head and your thoughts.
And Alan, so, and that's, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's the biggest knock I have on our industry. And you look at the hitting lessons and the pitching lessons that go on, and I was as guilty as the ones that are out there now. You know, the $50, I know our facility out in Glendora, $45, $50 an hour, and at least they're making mental skills training a part of the hitting. It just saddens me that the so many kids could be better, that by the time they're 12 or 13 years old, could they make a school team? Could they feel better about themselves? You wonder why we're losing so many kids across the country to other sports, because in baseball, because of the failure component and understanding and how to manage failure, and knowing that if you hit $150 by the time you're 13 years old, you're not even going to make a team. You've got so many years of just crap that's being taught over and over and over again, and particularly on the hitting side, where I spend more of my time on the high end. Take a bad swing and be on time. Have the visual skills of a hawk and do all the things in the world wrong, okay? Mm-hmm. Yet we go to these facilities around the country, and you talk to college hitting coaches, you talk to major league hitting coaches who don't have a clue, quite frankly. And it's the same nonsense over and over again because you teach what you know. At the end of the day, video has been great. And Tim Walton and I talked about this a few weeks ago, the coach from University of Florida. It has become, in my opinion, the biggest reasons why we have segmented deliveries. We've got segmented swings that have gone on, okay? Because we put video on and we watch Right View Pro and we can break it down in 30 frames per second, and unfortunately that's how most of the American instructors are teaching it. And that's why the American swing and the American delivery, generally speaking, looks that way.
When I get a pitcher who's dealing with control issues, or he's dealing with, you know, one of many things, you know what I always tell them to do, which is how I taught pitching. I used to do these camps for professionals before spring training for about 15 years, and I learned, because they were so mechanically sound and for the most part repeatable, that my job was really to get them to have consistency through a focal point, through their rhythm, and through their real aggressiveness to where they're going. Because the mind and body work well when you just are going one direction, you know, pretty much full speed. So now when a pitcher's struggling, it's unbelievable how often when I just tell them, look, pick a focal point, hit your balance point, and throw the ball as hard as you can.
Right.
It's eerie how quickly, A, they have immediate relief when they hear that from me, because they want to tell me about the 17 things they're working on, and B, the feedback when they do it. They're like, oh, man, I just felt natural again. I just wouldn't think about anything, and so coming from where you were talking about with the hitting idea, it's the same thing with pitching. It's amazing how mechanical guys can get and rigid, and I call it the ABC, method, and I'm more into the instinct and the dance and the rhythm and the repeatability, and athleticism and instincts come from the act of just doing it. And if you're an 8-year-old, yeah, you might need a lot of mechanical input, but once you start getting into college, especially in pro ball, man, it's about just seeing a spot and attacking.
Right.
It will come in. It will fall into place.
Well, you mentioned the pitching before, and it's interesting. There's a whole transformation, I think, going on with pitching in this country, and it really started. I don't know if you know the name Paul Nyman. Alan, you know Paul Nyman? Yeah. Paul Nyman, who I've known for many years, he really was the one, when you look at the Brett Stroms of the world and the Ron Wolforts of the world and the Paul Reddicks of the world, the information specifically, the back chain instruction, and really understanding what goes on in pure throwing. Paul Nyman, whose background was in engineering, he was the one that shocked the world. And unfortunately for him, he didn't have the commercial or entrepreneurial experience that others have had. But when you look at really what has gone on with scap loading and the tilt and understanding that balance really isn't static balance, it's balance while moving. This all came from Paul Nyman. And if you look at the names that I just mentioned, they've really kind of taken it to another level. They presented it better. They have more drills and whatnot. It really, you're seeing the teaching of pitching going back to yesteryear, where it was find your focal point, right? Be under control. We don't really allow the term balance point to be used in any of our locations, because there is no point in time for a delivery. A delivery is a living, breathing process. So to me, saying point, I think, was the reason why we were screwing up some kids in the 80s and 90s, and now it's just kind of now it's just kind of, you know what, feel your being, okay, feel under control. That becomes easier than the classic balance point. But you're right, whether it's pitching or hitting, doesn't it really get back to what is the end game or the end point, and let's attack and let's get to there. That's really what it comes down to. As usual, you and I ran out of time. We didn't stay on topic, okay, but this was great again. And again, those of you that have not seen or read Alan Jager's book, Getting Focused, Stay Focused, you can get it by Googling Jager Sports Academy. I'm sure that it's online. Most of our training centers now, Alan, I've got to talk to you about buying some for some of our locations, but get the book, be proactive in mental skills training, and we're still trying to get Alan to New York sometime soon. This is Tony Abbatine from Game On, and we'll see you next week with Jessica Mendoza.